I had been planning the camping trip for months. It wasn't anything fancy, just me, my backpack, and the woods. I had a route planned out in my mind, a secluded spot by a small stream I had been to once before. There's something about getting away from it all, just immersing yourself in the wilderness. No distractions, no people, just nature and me. I didn't think much could go wrong. I arrived at the trailhead early in the morning. The sky was still that faint blue of dawn, and the air had that crisp bite to it that you only get in the wilderness. I threw my backpack over my shoulders, adjusted the straps, and started walking. The trail was familiar, a narrow path lined with tall trees on either side. The only sound was the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots and the occasional call of a bird. Everything felt normal, even peaceful. The further I went, the less sign of human life there was. The occasional footprints on the dirt trail became rare, and the buzzing of nearby civilization seemed to fade into the background. I liked it that way, like the world had forgotten about me. I made my way to the spot by the stream, a place I had camped at years ago. There was a small clearing near the water, with a few rocks scattered around, perfect for setting up a tent. I unpacked everything and started setting up camp. The tent went up without any issues, and I gathered some wood to start a fire. The sun was starting to climb higher now, casting beams of light through the trees, filtering down onto the ground in patches. It was beautiful, peaceful, exactly what I had hoped for. Once the fire was crackling, I sat back and stared into the flames. There's something hypnotic about fire, how it dances and shifts, and for a while, I just watched it. The silence of the woods was all-encompassing, with nothing but the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. As the evening approached, I realized I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail all day. I hadn't expected to, but still, it felt strange. Normally, you'd run into someone, even if it's just another hiker or someone out for a quick day trip. But this time, the woods were entirely empty. Just me. I decided to take a walk around, stretch my legs. The forest around me was dense, trees packed close together with a tangle of underbrush. It wasn't too difficult to navigate, but it wasn't exactly easy either. The further I went, the more I felt like I was leaving behind any trace of civilization. There were no signs of animals, either. No birds chirping, no squirrels darting through the trees. Nothing. It was unnerving, the kind of quiet that felt a bit too heavy, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. After about an hour, I turned back and headed for camp. The fire was still going strong, the only source of light in the growing darkness. I sat down to eat, unpacking a few snacks and a thermos of coffee. The wind had picked up slightly, causing the branches above to creak and sway. The sound was like the forest stretching its limbs, waking up after a long sleep. I finished my meal, packed everything back up, and leaned back against a tree, just thinking. It's funny how when you're out in the middle of nowhere, you start to notice the smallest things. A branch snapping in the distance, the softest footstep on the forest floor. It's as if your senses are heightened. It's easy to dismiss the feeling, the one where you think someone's watching you, as paranoia, but I couldn't help it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. At first, I tried to brush it off. After all, this was supposed to be a relaxing trip. No worries, just me and nature. But then it happened again. A twig snapping in the distance. Not like a bird flapping its wings or a random gust of wind. It was deliberate, like someone was stepping carefully through the woods, trying to stay quiet. I stood up, scanning the forest around me. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows on the trees, but I saw nothing. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or something. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I sat back down, this time closer to the fire, trying to ignore the feeling that was crawling up my spine. It was getting late, and the sun had set completely, leaving only the glow of the fire and the faint outline of trees against the dark sky. The wind had died down, and all I could hear now was the crackling of the fire. Then I heard it again, this time closer. A soft shuffle of feet, not quite a footstep, but enough to make my heart skip. My eyes darted to the edge of the camp, but nothing moved. The forest felt still, but not in the peaceful way it had earlier. It was tense, like something was waiting, watching, And it wasn't just my imagination anymore. I grabbed a small flashlight from my pack, hoping it would help settle my nerves. I walked around the camp, scanning the trees with the beam of light. My hands were shaking a bit, but I tried to stay calm. I told myself it was nothing, just an animal, a raccoon or something, maybe. But as I circled the camp, my flashlight passed over something that made my stomach drop. The trees weren't as empty as I thought. There, in the darkness, just beyond the reach of the firelight, was a figure. It was just standing there, motionless. I couldn't make out details, just the vague shape of a person, a silhouette in the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest, and I froze. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. I wanted to call out, to do something, but I couldn't. All I could do was stare at it, paralyzed by fear. The seconds stretched on like hours. It didn't feel real, like I was caught in a nightmare. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure disappeared into the trees. It didn't run, didn't make any noise. It was just gone. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my flashlight trembling in my hand. It wasn't until I heard a distant rustling sound, like something heavy moving through the underbrush, that I snapped out of it. I turned and bolted for the tent, my heart racing. I wasn't even sure what I was afraid of. Was it a person? A hunter? I had no idea. I spent the rest of the night in the tent, barely sleeping, my mind racing with questions. Who was out there? Why were they watching me? What did they want? By morning, I packed up and left as quickly as I could. The woods felt different now, more oppressive. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was suffocating. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead, and even then, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone, or something, to be following me. To this day, I still don't know who or what I saw in the woods that night. But one thing's for sure, I'll never camp there again. Some places aren't meant to be visited. Some people, or things, are better left undisturbed. And that night, I learned the hard way that some woods are never as empty as they seem. The plan was simple. I had decided to go camping alone for a few days, something I had always wanted to do but never got around to. No distractions, no commitments, just me, the wilderness, and my backpack. I had done some research and picked a spot near a remote lake I had seen online, far enough from the busy trailheads where you rarely encounter anyone. The idea of being completely alone in nature, without any human noise or interruptions, was exactly what I needed. I parked my car at the nearest trailhead early in the morning, just as the sky was starting to lighten. The air was cool, fresh with that early morning dew, and the forest smelled of pine and damp earth. I strapped on my backpack, adjusted the straps, and set off. The trail was narrow, winding between the trees and up through a small ridge. The more I walked, the quieter it got. It's funny, but the further you go into the woods, the more it feels like the world is slipping away behind you, like the noise of life is just slowly getting erased. The hike itself wasn't difficult. A couple of hours of steady walking through the forest and I had arrived. The lake was just as I remembered from the pictures. Still, clear water surrounded by a thick wall of trees. The air cool with the touch of wind that stirred the tops of the pines. There was a small clearing near the shore, perfect for setting up camp. I decided that this would be my spot for the next couple of days. The first hour was spent setting up my tent and gathering firewood. The sky was still clear, the sun filtering through the trees in long beams of light, making everything look almost dreamlike. I had brought some food with me, dehydrated meals, snacks, and set up my camp with a sense of satisfaction. I could already feel the peace of the place, the calming effect of being far from everything. By mid-afternoon, the campsite was set, and I had a small fire going. The crackling of the flames and the occasional rustle of the leaves in the wind were the only sounds that filled the air. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like everything is holding its breath. I sat by the fire, reading a book, just letting the time slip by. It wasn't until late in the afternoon that I started to notice something strange. The woods were eerily quiet. There was no sound of birds, no squirrels darting across the forest floor, no rustling of leaves in the trees. It was like the whole forest had gone still, as if everything was waiting for something. I shook it off at first. Maybe it was just a lull, Or maybe I was just overly sensitive. But the silence stretched on, and the longer I sat there, the more it felt wrong. I tried to push the thought out of my mind. I stood up, stretched my legs, and decided to go for a short walk around the perimeter of the campsite. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the ground. I followed a small game trail that wound through the underbrush, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. The forest seemed deeper now, the trees taller, the shadows longer. I walked for about 15 minutes, my boots crunching on the dry leaves and pine needles. I turned back, figuring it was time to start dinner. As I retraced my steps, I noticed something odd. There were fresh footprints in the dirt, large and deep, as if someone had walked along the trail just before me. They weren't animal tracks, too big, too wide. They looked human. I stood there for a moment, staring at the prints. The idea that someone else was out here never really crossed my mind. I was so far off the beaten path, and there were no other vehicles parked at the trailhead. The only logical explanation would be someone else who had hiked in here, but it was starting to feel like I was the only one who had any business being in these woods. The footprints led toward the area near the lake, then faded out in the soft soil by the water's edge. I swallowed, my stomach tightening. There was no sign of anyone now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been walking around the area, maybe even watching me. I hurried back to camp, heart racing now, and added more logs to the fire. The flames crackled loudly, but the silence of the forest felt heavier than ever. I couldn't explain it, but the stillness was suffocating. Nightfall came quickly. I sat by the fire, eating a quick meal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the trees, just out of sight. I hadn't heard anyone approaching, hadn't seen any signs of movement since I'd noticed the footprints. But there was something about the silence, the way the woods felt so unnaturally still, that made me nervous. I stayed close to the fire for the rest of the night, trying to keep my thoughts rational. The night sounds of the forest should have been comforting, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of the leaves. But they didn't come. Only the wind whispered through the trees, and the occasional crackle of the fire. Every time I heard a branch snap in the distance, my heart would jump. Every rustle of leaves seemed too loud, too deliberate. It was as if the woods were full of secrets that weren't meant to be uncovered. I couldn't stay by the fire forever, though. Eventually, I made my way to the tent, unzipping the flap and crawling inside. I laid there, wide awake, listening to every sound in the dark, feeling the weight of the silence. I tried to sleep, but it wasn't until hours later that I finally drifted off, the firelight flickering faintly through the fabric of the tent. Sometime during the night, I woke up to a sound. It was soft at first, just a light scratching noise, almost like something running its claws along the tent. I froze, holding my breath. It stopped, then started again. Slow, steady, right near the side of the tent. My mind raced. Was it an animal? A raccoon? A bear? I grabbed my flashlight, flicked it on, and shined it through the fabric. There was nothing there, but the sound didn't stop. It continued scratching, scraping, like something was trying to get in. I held my breath, too afraid to make a sound, too afraid to move. The scratching persisted for a while, then suddenly stopped. The silence returned, and I lay there, barely breathing, waiting for something, anything, to break the stillness. Hours passed. I didn't sleep, and eventually, the first light of morning crept into the tent. The noises had stopped. There was no sign of anything around the campsite. I packed up quickly, heart pounding the entire time. I didn't waste any more time than I had to. I wanted out of those woods as fast as possible. As I made my way back down the trail, I glanced back over my shoulder one last time. The forest was quiet again, the same as it had been when I first arrived. But it didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt empty. The kind of emptiness that makes you wonder if you were ever truly alone to begin with. When I finally reached my car, I didn't look back again. I threw my backpack in the trunk and drove off, not stopping until I was back in the familiar hustle of the city. But I never forgot that night in the woods, the sound of the scratching, the oppressive silence, and the feeling that I was being watched. I'll never camp alone again. Not there, not anywhere. Because sometimes, nature is just too quiet, and some things in the woods are better left undisturbed. The plan was simple. I had decided to go camping alone for a few days, something I had always wanted to do but never got around to. No distractions, no commitments, just me, the wilderness, and my backpack. I had done some research and picked a spot near a remote lake I had seen online, far enough from the busy trailheads where you rarely encounter anyone. The idea of being completely alone in nature, without any human noise or interruptions, was exactly what I needed. I parked my car at the nearest trailhead early in the morning, just as the sky was starting to lighten. The air was cool, fresh with that early morning dew, and the forest smelled of pine and damp earth. I strapped on my backpack, adjusted the straps, and set off. The trail was narrow, winding between the trees and up through a small ridge. The more I walked, the quieter it got. It's funny, but the further you go into the woods, the more it feels like the world is slipping away behind you, like the noise of life is just slowly getting erased. The hike itself wasn't difficult. A couple of hours of steady walking through the forest and I had arrived. The lake was just as I remembered from the pictures. Still, clear water surrounded by a thick wall of trees. The air cool with the touch of wind that stirred the tops of the pines. There was a small clearing near the shore, perfect for setting up camp. I decided that this would be my spot for the next couple of days. The first hour was spent setting up my tent and gathering firewood. The sky was still clear, the sun filtering through the trees in long beams of light, making everything look almost dreamlike. I had brought some food with me, dehydrated meals, snacks, and set up my camp with a sense of satisfaction. I could already feel the peace of the place, the calming effect of being far from everything. By mid-afternoon, the campsite was set, and I had a small fire going. The crackling of the flames and the occasional rustle of the leaves in the wind were the only sounds that filled the air. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like everything is holding its breath. I sat by the fire, reading a book, just letting the time slip by. It wasn't until late in the afternoon that I started to notice something strange. The woods were eerily quiet. There was no sound of birds, no squirrels darting across the forest floor, no rustling of leaves in the trees. It was like the whole forest had gone still, as if everything was waiting for something. I shook it off at first. Maybe it was just a lull, or maybe I was just overly sensitive. But the silence stretched on, and the longer I sat there, the more it felt wrong. I tried to push the thought out of my mind. I stood up, stretched my legs, and decided to go for a short walk around the perimeter of the campsite. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the ground. I followed a small game trail that wound through the underbrush, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. The forest seemed deeper now, the trees taller, the shadows longer. I walked for about 15 minutes, my boots crunching on the dry leaves and pine needles. I turned back, figuring it was time to start dinner. As I retraced my steps, I noticed something odd. There were fresh footprints in the dirt, large and deep, as if someone had walked along the trail just before me. They weren't animal tracks, too big, too wide. They looked human. I stood there for a moment, staring at the prints. The idea that someone else was out here never really crossed my mind. I was so far off the beaten path, and there were no other vehicles parked at the trailhead. The only logical explanation would be someone else who had hiked in here, but it was starting to feel like I was the only one who had any business being in these woods. The footprints led toward the area near the lake, then faded out in the soft soil by the water's edge. I swallowed, my stomach tightening. There was no sign of anyone now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been walking around the area, maybe even watching me. I hurried back to camp, heart racing now, and added more logs to the fire. The flames crackled loudly, but the silence of the forest felt heavier than ever. I couldn't explain it, but the stillness was suffocating. Nightfall came quickly. I sat by the fire, eating a quick meal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the trees, just out of sight. I hadn't heard anyone approaching, hadn't seen any signs of movement since I'd noticed the footprints. But there was something about the silence, the way the woods felt so unnaturally still, that made me nervous. I stayed close to the fire for the rest of the night, trying to keep my thoughts rational. The night sounds of the forest should have been comforting, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of the leaves. But they didn't come. Only the wind whispered through the trees, and the occasional crackle of the fire. Every time I heard a branch snap in the distance, my heart would jump. Every rustle of leaves seemed too loud, too deliberate. It was as if the woods were full of secrets that weren't meant to be uncovered. I couldn't stay by the fire forever, though. Eventually, I made my way to the tent, unzipping the flap and crawling inside. I laid there, wide awake, listening to every sound in the dark, feeling the weight of the silence. I tried to sleep, but it wasn't until hours later that I finally drifted off, the firelight flickering faintly through the fabric of the tent. Sometime during the night, I woke up to a sound. It was soft at first, just a light scratching noise, almost like something running its claws along the tent. I froze, holding my breath. It stopped, then started again. Slow, steady, right near the side of the tent. My mind raced. Was it an animal? A raccoon? A bear? I grabbed my flashlight, flicked it on, and shined it through the fabric. There was nothing there, but the sound didn't stop. It continued scratching, scraping, like something was trying to get in. I held my breath, too afraid to make a sound, too afraid to move. The scratching persisted for a while, then suddenly stopped. The silence returned, and I lay there, barely breathing, waiting for something, anything, to break the stillness. Hours passed. I didn't sleep, and eventually, the first light of morning crept into the tent. The noises had stopped. There was no sign of anything around the campsite. I packed up quickly, heart pounding the entire time. I didn't waste any more time than I had to. I wanted out of those woods as fast as possible. As I made my way back down the trail, I glanced back over my shoulder one last time. The forest was quiet again, the same as it had been when I first arrived. But it didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt empty, the kind of emptiness that makes you wonder if you were ever truly alone to begin with. When I finally reached my car, I didn't look back again. I threw my backpack in the trunk and drove off, not stopping until I was back in the familiar hustle of the city. But I never forgot that night in the woods, the sound of the scratching, the oppressive silence, and the feeling that I was being watched. I'll never camp alone again. Not there, not anywhere. Because sometimes, nature is just too quiet, and some things in the woods are better left undisturbed. It was supposed to be the perfect camping trip. I'd been planning it for weeks. Just me, the woods, and a weekend to clear my head. I'd done this kind of trip before, so I was confident I knew what I was doing. The weather was perfect, the trail was well marked, and I had everything I needed. A tent, sleeping bag, food, water, and enough gear to get by. I was looking forward to the quiet, the solitude. No distractions, just nature. I parked my car at the trailhead around noon. The sun still high in the sky. The parking lot was empty, which suited me just fine. I liked being alone in the woods. I didn't expect to see anyone for at least a couple of days. I slung my backpack over my shoulders and began the hike. The trail was easy at first, wide and well-trodden. The kind of path that you could hike without even thinking. The further I went, the less sign of human life there was. The path narrowed as it wound through the forest, the trees growing taller and denser. I could hear birds in the distance, the occasional squirrel rustling through the leaves, the kind of peaceful sounds that make you forget about everything back home. After a few hours of walking, I came to a small clearing near a creek. It wasn't much, but it was the perfect spot to set up camp. I could hear the water rushing over the rocks, and the trees around me formed a natural barrier, sheltering the area from the wind. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and got a small fire going. By then, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing. I ate a quick dinner, enjoying the peaceful quiet of the forest. The fire crackled, and the light from the flames flickered in the dark. The forest was still, but there was a subtle hum in the air, a quiet energy that I couldn't quite place. I sat by the fire, letting the sounds of the night wash over me. The crackling of the fire, the distant sound of the creek, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and I zipped myself into my sleeping bag. I left the flap of the tent slightly open, just enough to let in some fresh air. The wind had picked up, but it wasn't too bad. There were no clouds in the sky, and the stars were out in full force. The fire burned low, casting faint shadows against the walls of my tent. I drifted off to sleep, the sound of the wind in the trees and the creek lulling me into a deep slumber. I woke up later that night to a sound. It wasn't the usual sounds of the forest. No wind, no rustling leaves. This sound was different. It was a soft scraping noise, like something was moving along the ground. I sat up in my sleeping bag, listening. The sound stopped, and for a moment, I thought it was just the wind again. But then it came again. This time it was closer, just outside the tent. I held my breath, trying to listen carefully. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Something was moving out there, creeping around my camp. My heart began to race. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate, too methodical. I slowly reached for my flashlight, my hands shaking. I pointed it at the entrance of the tent, waiting, but the light didn't help much. The darkness outside swallowed up the beam, and I couldn't see anything. The noise stopped again, and I waited, straining my ears. Nothing. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move past the entrance of the tent. It was quick, too quick. I froze. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't trying to be stealthy anymore. I could hear the crunch of leaves, the unmistakable sound of someone walking on the forest floor. I knew I had to make a decision. I could stay in the tent, hide, and hope whatever it was would go away. Or I could get out and make a run for it. I decided to stay quiet, hoping that the person, if it was even a person, would leave. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps came closer, then stopped. I could feel the presence outside, like someone was standing just outside, watching the tent. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and my hands were clammy with sweat. I couldn't stay there anymore. I needed to know what was out there. I unzipped the tent slowly, trying to be as quiet as possible, and peered out into the dark. The fire had long since burned out, leaving only faint embers. The woods around me were thick with shadows, the trees standing like silent sentinels in the darkness. I couldn't see anyone. I waited a moment longer, scanning the clearing. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to breathe a sigh of relief, I saw something move near the edge of the forest. A figure. It was standing in the trees, barely visible in the dark, but I could see it clearly enough to know it wasn't an animal. It was too tall, too upright. It didn't move. It just stood there, like it was waiting for me to do something. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't just sit in the tent all night, but I didn't want to approach the figure either. I grabbed my knife from my pack and clutched it in my hand. Slowly, I stepped out of the tent, trying to keep my movements as quiet as possible. The figure didn't move, didn't react. I started to walk toward it, my breath shallow, my nerves on edge. As I got closer, I could see that it was a man. His clothes were dark, tattered, and he looked like he hadn't shaved in days. His face was gaunt, pale, and his eyes were fixed on me. I froze. He didn't speak, didn't make a sound. He just stood there, watching me. I took another step forward, my grip tightening on the knife. I wasn't sure if he was dangerous, if he was lost or just some crazy person who had wandered too far into the woods. But something about the way he was standing, the way he was staring at me, sent a chill down my spine. And then, just as quickly as I had seen him, he turned and disappeared into the trees. His movements were fast, too fast for someone who had been standing completely still just seconds before. He melted into the darkness like he had never been there at all. I stood there, my legs trembling, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't know if I should chase after him or run in the opposite direction. But something told me that if I stayed out here any longer, I wasn't going to make it out of the woods alive. I hurried back to my tent, packed up my things as quickly as I could, and grabbed my gear. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I didn't care about anything except getting the hell out of there. I made my way back to the trailhead as fast as I could, my heart hammering in my chest. The forest was quiet again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like something is wrong, like something is watching you. When I finally reached my car, I didn't stop to look around. I threw my gear into the trunk and drove off without looking back. I didn't care about the campsite or the trip anymore. I just wanted to be far away from that place, from whatever or whoever I had seen in the woods. The next day, I went online to check if there had been any reports of missing hikers or strange encounters in the area, but I found nothing. It was like the whole experience had been erased. But I know what I saw, and I'll never go camping alone again. Not in those woods. Not in any woods. Because sometimes, when you're out there alone, in the middle of nowhere, you don't know who or what might be watching you. And sometimes you're not as alone as you think. It was supposed to be a peaceful solo camping trip. Just me, a tent, and the quiet of the wilderness. After a few months of stressful work, I needed a break. No phone calls, no emails, no distractions, just the woods. I'd been hiking and camping for years, so this wasn't my first time out, but something about this trip felt different from the start. Maybe it was because I'd chosen a new spot, an isolated lake hidden deep in the forest, a place far away from the usual crowds. It wasn't on any popular trails, and the only way to get there was a narrow, overgrown path that most people wouldn't dare venture down. It was perfect, or at least it seemed that way at the time. I drove out early that morning, the air cool and crisp as I headed deeper into the mountains. The closer I got to my destination, the more remote it felt. The road narrowed, and trees began to crowd the edges of the asphalt, their shadows stretching long in the early morning light. I passed a few rundown cabins, some with overgrown yards, but there was no one around. No cars, no signs of life. It was exactly what I wanted, a place to get away from everything. I parked my car at the trailhead, grabbed my gear, and started down the path. The trail was quiet, with only the sound of my boots crunching the gravel underfoot and the occasional bird call. It was a good hike, nothing too difficult, but long enough to feel like I was getting away from civilization. The trees were dense, the forest thick with the smell of pine and earth. It felt like I was walking through a forgotten world, untouched by time. The further I went, the less I saw signs of human activity. There were no more trail markers, no evidence of other hikers. The path became more rugged, overgrown with vines and brush. I had to push through some of it, but I didn't mind. It felt more like an adventure. After about 2 hours, I finally made it to the lake. The water was still, reflecting the blue sky above, surrounded by a dense wall of trees. There was no one around, just the sound of the wind in the leaves and the distant call of a loon. Perfect. I set up camp near the shore, pitching my tent on a flat patch of ground near the trees. I spent the next few hours gathering firewood, making a small campfire, and getting everything ready for the night. The sun was starting to dip low in the sky, and the air was cooling down. I had brought a simple dinner, freeze-dried meals, and some snacks, and I settled in for a quiet evening. The fire crackled, and the scent of burning wood filled the air. I didn't hear anything but the occasional rustle of leaves or the soft ripples on the lake. It was peaceful, too peaceful in a way. As the evening went on, the temperature dropped quickly. I threw a few more logs onto the fire and bundled up in my jacket. The stars began to appear in the clear sky, and I leaned back against a tree, staring up at the constellations. It was nice, in a way, being so far removed from the world, from everything. I had no agenda, no worries, nothing to think about but the crackling fire and the sounds of the woods. But then, just as the fire was starting to die down, I heard something. It was faint at first, just a soft crunching sound, like someone walking through the forest, but far away. I paused and strained my ears. The sound was coming from behind me, further into the woods. It was impossible to tell how far away, but it definitely wasn't an animal. The sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It sounded like someone was walking on two legs. I shook it off, telling myself it was probably another hiker. Maybe someone had followed the same trail, or maybe it was just an animal moving through the brush. But as the minutes passed, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The noise kept going, slow and steady. It didn't sound random like an animal, but purposeful. The sound was getting closer, and my heart rate picked up. I stood up, walked over to the edge of the clearing, and shined my flashlight into the trees, but I couldn't see anything. There were no shapes in the darkness, no movement, just the silent shadows of the trees. I stood there for a long moment, my breath visible in the chilly air, listening. The sound stopped. I waited. Nothing. After a few minutes, I went back to the fire and tried to relax, but it was impossible. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. The forest around me felt too still, too quiet. Even the crickets had stopped chirping, the usual night noises completely absent. It felt as though everything was holding its breath, waiting for something. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. I sat down by the fire again, forcing myself to breathe normally. I tried to push the feeling out of my mind, but every small noise seemed amplified in the silence. The wind rustling through the leaves, the crackle of the fire, the occasional snap of a twig. It all felt louder, sharper. And then I heard it again, this time closer. The crunch of footsteps, slow, deliberate steps, not far away. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the woods again, heart pounding in my chest. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no sign of anything. No one was there. I stood up again, my eyes scanning the darkness. The footsteps had stopped, but I could feel something watching me. The tension in the air was thick, and I felt my pulse quicken. I grabbed my knife from my backpack, just in case. It was probably nothing. Maybe someone was just passing through. Maybe it was a hiker who had gotten lost. But that thought didn't comfort me. I was alone out here, deep in the woods, with no one to rely on but myself. The fire was burning low now, just a few embers glowing red. The shadows around me seemed to stretch longer, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being circled. I kept my flashlight in my hand, the beam scanning the trees, the rocks, the ground. But I didn't see anything. No one was there. And then I heard it again, the footsteps. But this time they weren't just behind me. They were all around me, moving in a circle, slowly, deliberately, as if someone was stalking me. My heart raced. I could feel the cold sweat on the back of my neck. I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave. I needed to get to my car, back to safety. I grabbed my pack, shoved it into the tent, and zipped it up as fast as I could. My mind was racing, adrenaline flooding my system. I didn't care about the fire or my gear. I just needed to get out. I turned to leave the clearing when I froze. Standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam, I saw a figure. It wasn't clear, just a shadow, darker than the surrounding forest, standing perfectly still. It was humanoid, but I couldn't make out any details. Just the silhouette of someone or something watching me. I didn't wait to see more. I didn't want to know who or what it was. My feet moved before my brain even processed what was happening. I grabbed my flashlight and bolted down the path, not looking back. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees almost suffocating in their stillness. My heart was pounding in my chest as I ran, every snap of a twig underfoot sending a jolt of panic through me. I didn't stop running until I reached the trailhead, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I turned to look back at the forest, but all I saw was darkness. I didn't go back for my tent or my gear. I didn't care about anything except getting in my car and driving as far away from that place as I could. The whole way back, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing on the side of the road. I never found out who or what was out there in the woods. But I know one thing for sure, whatever it wasn't friendly. I've camped in many places since, but I'll never go back to that spot. Some places are meant to be left alone, and I'm fine with never knowing what was out there in the darkness. I had been planning the camping trip for weeks. Summer was in full swing, and I was craving some time alone in the woods. The kind of time when you get to disconnect from everything. No phone, no emails, just me and nature. I'd done plenty of solo trips before, so this wasn't my first time. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm, and the forecast said no rain for the next few days. felt like everything was lined up just right. I found a secluded spot at a state park about 3 hours away from home, a place that wasn't too popular. It had a small lake, and from what I read online, it was a peaceful place, perfect for camping. The place was a bit off the main trail, but not so far that I'd have trouble finding it. I checked the maps, packed my gear, and left early in the morning, hoping to get there before it got too hot. The drive was smooth, the kind of drive where the scenery is almost hypnotic. Fields, hills, and forests passing by as I listened to music. The windows rolled down to let in the warm summer air. I pulled off the highway, following the winding road that led deeper into the woods, and eventually reached the trailhead. The parking lot was nearly empty, with just a couple of cars parked along the gravel. That was a good sign. I was looking for solitude, and it seemed like I'd find just that. I grabbed my backpack, checked the straps, and set off on the trail. The sun was high, and the path was dappled with patches of light that filtered through the trees. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth, with a slight warmth from the sun that made everything feel alive. The hike was easy, not too steep, and the trail twisted through a thick forest of evergreens and hardwoods. There was the occasional sound of birds chirping, and a breeze rustled the leaves above me. All in all, it was the peaceful kind of walk I had been hoping for. After about an hour of walking, I came to a small clearing near the lake. The spot was just as described. A wide, flat area with some large rocks near the shore and a few trees scattered around for shade. I dropped my pack and took in the view. The water was calm, the reflection of the trees rippling gently with the breeze. The only sound was the soft murmur of the lake as it lapped against the shore. It felt like I had the entire place to myself. I set up my tent, got a small fire pit ready, and began unpacking my gear. There was no rush. I had the entire day to myself, and the temperature was perfect. Not too hot, not too cold. I got the fire going, and as the flames crackled, I sat back on a rock and enjoyed the quiet. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this at ease. It was just me, nature, and the simple rhythm of the outdoors. By late afternoon, the sun started to dip lower, casting a warm, golden light across the lake. I made myself some dinner, enjoying the smell of the food and the comfort of being alone with no one to interrupt my thoughts. As the light faded, I added more wood to the fire, watching the flames grow higher. The sound of the fire was soothing, but the woods around me had grown oddly silent. I didn't hear the usual night sounds, the chirping of crickets or the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe the animals had all gone further into the woods. The sun finally set, and the stars started to show through the gaps in the trees. It was a beautiful night, clear, with just a hint of a breeze. I sat by the fire for a while longer, watching the embers glow as the night deepened. I had no plans to go to sleep anytime soon. The fire was too comforting, and I was in no rush to leave the peaceful warmth of the campsite. But then, as I sat there, I heard something. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a faint sound, like a twig snapping. I thought it was probably a raccoon or some other small animal moving through the brush. But then it came again, louder this time. And this time it sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate, but still far enough away that I couldn't see anything. I froze for a moment, my heart rate picking up. It wasn't the usual forest noises. I stood up quietly, trying to listen, but the sound stopped. I scanned the trees, the shadows now deep and dark. Nothing. I didn't hear anything for a while, and I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a deer or even a bear, though I wasn't sure if there were bears in this area. Still, I felt uneasy. The air seemed too still, too heavy. The fire crackled loudly, the only sound breaking the silence, and I tried to relax. But then I heard it again. This time it was closer. The footsteps were more distinct now, more deliberate. Whoever or whatever was out there, they weren't trying to be quiet. I could hear the crunch of leaves, the snap of branches underfoot. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I grabbed my flashlight from my pack and turned it on, shining it into the woods. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees and the underbrush, but there was no one there. Nothing moved. just the trees swaying slightly in the breeze. I exhaled, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe someone else was camping nearby, or maybe it was just an animal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to go check. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. Maybe nothing, maybe a lost hiker, but I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed my knife from my backpack and slipped it into my pocket, just in case. Slowly, I crept toward the edge of the clearing where I had heard the footsteps. The forest was dark now, the firelight casting long, eerie shadows on the trees. I scanned the area, but the only sound I could hear was my own breathing. The footsteps had stopped. I waited for a moment, listening intently, and then I saw something, a flash of movement just beyond the trees. Something or someone darting through the underbrush, too quick to get a good look at. My pulse quickened. My gut told me that whoever it was, they weren't just out for a stroll. I backed away slowly, my hand tightening on the knife. The last thing I wanted was to confront whoever or whatever was out there. I returned to the campsite, my heart pounding. I couldn't relax, couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I gathered my things quickly, stuffing them into my bag, not caring about being quiet anymore. I wasn't about to stick around to find out who or what that was in the woods. I grabbed my tent, my gear, and started the hike back to the trailhead as fast as I could. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to jump out from behind the trees. The woods were completely still again, but I wasn't fooled. I knew something was out there. Maybe it was just a person who had lost their way. Maybe it was something else. Whatever it was, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I finally made it back to the car, sweating and breathing hard, feeling like I was being watched the entire time. I didn't stop to look back. I tossed my gear into the back of my car and sped off, not stopping until I was miles away from that place. I've never gone back to that spot. I've camped plenty of other places, but something about that night, that feeling of being watched, has stuck with me. Sometimes, when I'm hiking through the woods, I get that same uneasy feeling, like I'm not really alone. And every time I remember that night by the lake, I can't help but wonder who or what was really out there. I'll never know, but I'm fine with that. Some things are better left in the dark. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon as I set up camp. The air was still warm, but you could feel the chill of the evening settling in, creeping through the woods like an unwanted guest. I was at least 2 miles from the nearest trailhead, and the only sounds around me were the chirping of crickets, the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind, and the distant calls of birds settling for the night. I figured I was far enough away from the usual camping areas to enjoy some solitude. Just me, my tent, and the woods. I had hiked all day, following a narrow, winding trail that led me through thick pines and over rugged rocks. My pack was heavy, and my legs were sore from the constant uphill climbs. But I was looking forward to a night under the stars. After setting up my tent and gathering firewood, I made a small campfire, the flames licking the air as they crackled. The warmth from the fire felt good against the cool night air, but there was something off about the way the shadows danced around me. I couldn't quite place it, but I felt a tightness in my chest, like I was being watched. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows on the trees around me. They stretched out like fingers, reaching for me. I tried to shake the feeling, telling myself it was just the darkness playing tricks on my mind. I was out here all the time. This wasn't my first camping trip, and I had always felt safe. Still, as I sat there eating a quick dinner of trail mix and jerky, I couldn't help but glance around the clearing every so often, the sensation of eyes on me never fully leaving. It was just my mind, I thought. After dinner, I leaned back on a rock by the fire, watching the flames shift in the breeze. The sky was clear, and the stars shone brightly above, the moon a thin crescent hanging in the vast blackness. I felt the tension in my shoulders slowly melt away as I closed my eyes for a few moments, letting the quiet of the woods lull me into a semi-relaxed state. Then, I heard it, a twig snapping. It wasn't the usual sounds of the forest. This was deliberate, clear, crisp, and too close. My eyes snapped open, and I sat up quickly, scanning the shadows. The firelight didn't reach far enough to reveal anything in the dark, but I was sure I had heard it. I stood up, slowly, trying not to make any noise. The air felt heavier now, the breeze colder. My heart began to race, and my hands instinctively went to the knife at my belt. I didn't know what I was expecting, but there was an unease creeping into my gut, a feeling that I couldn't shake. I listened closely. Nothing. No more twigs snapping, no crunching of leaves, but the silence felt too thick, too oppressive. I could hear my own breath as it quickened, the steady thrum of my pulse in my ears. It was like the whole forest had held its breath, waiting. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my back rigid, my eyes darting between the trees. But after a long stretch of silence, I convinced myself it had been nothing, just a deer or some other animal. Probably a squirrel or a raccoon. Something harmless. I grabbed the log from the fire and tossed it into the flames, sending sparks into the night. The fire crackled, and the sound helped to calm my nerves, but I still couldn't shake that feeling. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I glanced over my shoulder once more, just in case. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. I sat back down, but I didn't feel as relaxed as I had before. The firelight seemed weaker, somehow, as if the darkness around me was pressing in. Then I heard it again, closer this time. A snap of a twig, followed by the unmistakable sound of something moving through the underbrush. I froze. My blood ran cold, and every instinct in me screamed to get out of there, to pack up and leave, but I couldn't make myself move. I felt paralyzed, rooted to the spot. I stared into the dark, waiting, the sound growing louder as whatever it was drew nearer. My breath hitched in my chest. I couldn't see anything, just the blackness of the trees and the shadows that seemed to move on their own. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of something shifting among the trees. It was only for a second, but it was enough to send my heart into overdrive. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't an animal. It was too large, too deliberate. I knew I had to do something, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. They felt like lead, my muscles frozen in fear. The sound of movement stopped. I strained my ears, listening for anything that might give away the source, but there was only silence. The tension in the air was suffocating. It felt like I was being surrounded, like the darkness itself was closing in around me. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on, my hands shaking as I pointed it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the gnarled trunks of the pines and the shifting shadows of the branches. But then, just as I was about to lower the flashlight, I saw it. In the distance, behind the trees, a figure, tall, maybe 6 feet or more, standing completely still in the shadows. It was just there, like it was waiting for something. My stomach twisted. It didn't move, didn't acknowledge the light. It just stood there, and that was worse than anything. I didn't know what to do. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body was frozen. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it, my flashlight trembling in my hand. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. But the longer I looked, the more I realized it wasn't just standing. It was watching me. The realization hit me like a slap, and panic surged through me. I backed away from the fire, keeping my eyes on the figure. My thoughts were racing, but nothing seemed to make sense. Who would be out here? It was late, too late for a hiker, and definitely too late for anyone to just be lurking in the woods. It didn't add up, but as my brain tried to process the situation, I realized something. I wasn't alone. Whoever, or whatever, was out there wasn't leaving, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out why. I grabbed my pack and ran. No time to think, no time to hesitate. The cold night air rushed past me, but I didn't care. I couldn't shake the image of that figure standing there, motionless and watching. I didn't even look back. My feet pounded against the ground, and the sound of my heartbeat seemed to drown out everything else. I didn't stop running until I hit the trailhead. By then, the only sound left was my ragged breathing, and the eerie stillness of the woods had fallen away. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know what had been out there. All I knew was that whatever it was, I wasn't sticking around to find out. The rest of the night was a blur. I ended up back at my car, shaking and drenched in sweat, but I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel at ease again until I was driving down the road, leaving the woods behind. Even now, months later, I still don't know who or what I saw that night, but I've never gone camping alone again. Some things are better left in the dark.